we would like everyone to please find their seats so we can begin with this celebration.
Welcome to this wonderful celebration of the life of Ann Pollina. I wanted to welcome you to Westover School and tell you all that it has been an honor and a privilege to follow Ann as head of this wonderful school. This school, as it stands today, is a reflection of Ann and her inspired leadership, and her legacy lives on every day in the students of Westover. It lives on in their joy. It lives on in their intellectual curiosity. It lives on in their seriousness of purpose. And most importantly, it lives on in their drive to change the world.
To be simple, 'tis the gift to be free, 'tis the gift to come down where you ought to be. And when we find ourselves in the place just right, 'twill be in the valley of love and delight. When true simplicity is gained, to bow and to bend we shan't be ashamed. To turn will be our delight, till by turning we come round right. 'Tis the gift to be simple, 'tis the gift to be free, 'tis the gift to come down where you ought to be. And when we find ourselves in a place just right, 'twill be in the valley of love and delight.
We're here to celebrate and give thanks for the life of Ann Stephanie Mayorina Pollina. And in celebrating Ann's life, each one of us will remember some special time with her and some special effect that she made on our lives.
I don't think it's any accident that someone who was as keenly attuned to her students and someone who believed in their goodness, I just don't think it's any accident that that person is going to find out how much girls have to offer to this world.
It's transformational the way a community of women can support each other and really aim all of our efforts at those very fine qualities, at leadership, at risk-taking, appropriate risk-taking, at voice, really the development of voice.
The one thing you always knew about Ann is that she loved what she did, whether it was mathematics and teaching or her family, her husband and her beautiful daughters.
She was the most wise person to work for. A combination of her intelligence, her ability to problem solve, but yet her loving warmth and loving kindness and always wanting to find solutions that would make people happy.
The most remarkable thing about Ann, I think, was she often believed in me more than I believed in myself. And I think other people felt that way too. I'd go into her office and talk with her about whatever, and whatever doubts I had, self-doubts or whatever, just vanished.
When I think of Ann Pollina, I think most of her smile. And the next thing I think of is how comforted I felt in the community with her leadership.
Ann loved so much. She loved teaching, she loved math and science, she loved being a mom, and a mom to all of these Westover girls. You know, she loved the Westover community, and she put everything that she had into all that she loved.
She said, I know so much more about math than most of these students that when I explain it to them, it's not the same as if they get it from someone else their age who has their amount of experience. She said that's the key. She was really a remarkable woman.
There were 6 sophomores who were caught doing something they shouldn't have been doing, and they were suspended, which is a big deal. I mean, and for it to happen to 6 of them, that's considerable. But it was Ann's reaction to that and the way she handled it that just impressed me so much at that time, because what she said to all of us was, these are not bad kids. These are good kids who made a bad decision, and we look forward to welcoming them back into our community. And that's quintessential Ann Pollina. I mean, her ability to see the goodness in people.
And there was no question that Ann was clearly qualified and got a most encouraging result from her interviews, especially with the students. The students thought she was, as indeed she was, would be a superb teacher.
We had a group of men came in to interview Westover faculty to get an idea of what sort of person they should hire to replace Joe Mulder. And they said, well, what would you be looking for in the person who would be the next head? And I said, Ann Pollina. And they looked at each other. They both looked at each other and shook their heads. And I said, do you mean by that you've heard this before? They said, yeah. That was it. That was the end of the search.
The word you hear when you talk to the students, you know, amazing, remarkable, unique. I know many of the students, particularly the seniors right now, feel they will never meet another woman like Ann in their whole lives.
Ms. Pollina may be gone physically, but she is here. She is Westover. She is the embodiment. She is what we as alum aspire to. She inspires all of us, and she will always be with us.
100 years of inspiring women is what we like to say, and that's really true. The alumni of Westover are a fascinating group of women who've really made it their business to leave the world better than they found it, and I think that they have been doing that for over 100 years. And in fact, I think that that's one of the things that's wonderful about a school like Westover. When you have history and you have tradition like that behind you, it's incredibly inspiring for the girls now to see not only that there are people out there doing it, but they see themselves in that role. I can do it too.
Ann had warm memories of growing up in New York City on 117th Street and 2nd Avenue. In the 1950s, that whole neighborhood was an Italian neighborhood, and every street was filled with brownstones, side by side. Ann's grandparents lived on the bottom floor of her brownstone. Ann and her brother and her parents lived on the second floor of the brownstone, and Ann's aunt and uncle lived on the top floor of the brownstone. It was a time when children could play on the wide sidewalks and even play in the streets in the summer afternoons. And the boys would all play stoop ball. Do you know stoop ball? It's played with a hard rubber pink ball, and this ball is always called a Spalding. No matter what it says on it, this is a Spalding. And you throw it as hard as you can against the stoop, and it flies back up. I'm sure Lewis was playing that. But the girls had chalk, and they would draw games on the sidewalk, games like hopscotch. Now, I like to think that Anne had her own box of chalk and her own section of the sidewalk, and she was working on quadratic equations. I mean, how else could she have been so smart and so much ahead of all the rest of us in math, right? She started early. Anne was very close to her father, had wonderful memories of him, and he used to take Anne and her brother to Central Park for outings on the weekends. That was only a short walk away from their apartment to go to Central Park. And I think Anne and her brother certainly walked to neighborhood schools. It was a stable and secure environment in which to grow up, surrounded by your family and friends.
Excuse me. It seems to me that talking about Anne's college years should also begin with her father. Frank Maiorino was born, raised, lived, and worked his entire life in New York City. His view of the world was the one Saul Steinberg celebrated at his famous 1976 New Yorker cover cartoon, View from 9th Avenue. When we first brought him to our home in Vermont, down a dirt road tucked next to a small farm, Anne explained to him that we just wanted to have a place in the country. And his eyes widened and he said, "But Anne, you already live in the country." By which he meant here. Frank knew just how to tease his daughter. At the beginning of her time in college, Anne lived at home, and she would often share the events of her days and the exploits of her newly made college friends. In time, many of these friends would be invited to the Maiorinos' Bayside home. Upon being introduced, Frank would respond, "It's very nice to meet you. Are you the one who?" Upon being introduced, and at which point he would recount with unfailing recall the most embarrassing thing Anne had told him about that person months earlier. And this happened over and over again. Well, eventually I made my way to Bayside, and before I arrived, Anne delivered a stern warning. "Dad, I haven't told you anything about this guy. You don't know anything about him. You don't even know his name. Got it?" And Frank nodded. I arrived, was introduced, and had a great visit. Not lengthy, but not brief either. I thought it went well. As Anne and I were leaving, he extended his hand and said, "It's been very nice to meet you." And then with a quick glance at Anne, "What did you say your name was?" As we stepped outside and the door closed, she said, "I can't believe it. He got me again." The generation gap between dad and daughter was a nearly endless source of fun. The dinnertime debates were lively, witty, sometimes conducted at extremely audible levels, but always respectful and loving. Many of the quick habits of mind and speaking skills that Anne was admired for originated at that table and in that relationship. There was one generational difference, however, that was not small and could have had profound consequences for all of us. Dad wasn't sure why Anne needed to go to college. Her older brother was already attending, and Dad saw that as appropriate and sufficient. And admittedly, Frank was concerned that the family couldn't afford to send both brother and sister to college. But although he didn't understand why, he accepted that it was important to his daughter. Anne's mom, Stephanie, intervened with Frank, offering this argument. When you educate a man, you educate a person. But when you educate a woman, you educate a family. I hesitated to recount this because as a justification for women's education today, this is strange and anachronistic and maybe even a little troubling. But it was important enough to Ann for her to recount it years later. And our daughter, Emily, who has heard the story, points out that it is a precursor to one of Ann's most consistent messages as an educator, that your education is not just for you, but must also be used to enrich the lives of those around you and to make the world a better place. So Frank acquiesced, and Ann solved the financial problem herself with scholarships and part-time jobs. For most of her college years, weekends and summers, Ann worked in the credit department of Lord & Taylor's. So if any of you used store credit in that institution in the late 60s, it may have well been Ann who approved your purchase. And for a brief period of time, if you had lunch at Traft's in Midtown Manhattan, you may have been greeted and seated by Ann Marino and her smile. Once the decision was made, Frank never looked back. Support for Ann was, as it always was, total, unconditional, proud, and joyful, and so it was off to Fordham. Many of you may not know that Ann is actually a graduate of Thomas More College. This was an all-women's college started in 1964 as a complement to the all-male Fordham College. It had governance, administration, and classes that were separate from its male counterpart. By 1966, when Ann arrived, the separate classes had disappeared, but it remained a distinct college in administration and student governance until 1974, when it closed and Fordham College officially admitted women. She was in the third graduating class of Thomas More College. Ann and I actually shared a class right from the first day, honors calculus. So for a first-year course and an honors course at that, it was unusually large, over 40 students. It met 5 times a week in the morning. It was a phenomenal first college experience, made so largely by the instructor, a man named Salvatore Anastasio. While nearly all of the rest of my memories about courses and teachers from those years have faded, my memory of him remains clear. He was soft-spoken, engaging, articulate, funny, precise, challenging, encouraging, and generous. Ann worked for him as his teaching assistant during our senior year, and he became her first mentor. And I have no doubts that he helped shape her attitudes about teaching and about mathematics. While Anastasio was not atypical, the Fordham math program was not uniformly supportive, and Ann certainly experienced the gender bias that was all too common. But her ability and determination, coupled with Anastasio's outsized impact, helped overcome any discouragement she may have felt, and so she continued on to pursue a subject that she genuinely loved. And while on the subject of mentorship, I'd like to mention one other early one. I don't know how many people are aware of this. Ann began a master's program at NYU while working at her first teaching job out on Long Island. But her advisor, whose name I regrettably don't remember, insisted, when she came to Westover in 1972, she thought she would either delay the program or just drop out. And her advisor insisted that she not do this. And together they devised a program that would allow her to complete the degree. Here's how it worked. She would come home from Westover in the late afternoon. We were living in New Haven at the time. I would drive her to the train station. She would get herself down to Washington Square, take classes, and return by subway and train, arriving home at 1 a.m. She would then return to Westover the following morning in time for first period class. She did this twice a week for her entire first year. It was an extraordinary effort, even for someone whose work ethic was astonishing. It will not surprise you to learn that during her college years, Ann was a student leader. I mentioned earlier that Thomas More College remained separate in student government student governance during her years there. She was elected a class president of Thomas More in her junior year, and then served as president of Thomas More College student government during her senior year. And many of you may remember that 1969-70 was not an easy time to be a student leader. Protests of the Vietnam War were taking place at campuses all across the country. Kent State occurred just days before our senior year ended. At Fordham, there were negotiations and confrontations with the university administration, classes were disrupted, buildings occupied, and student government was actively involved. All the while this was taking place, the Thomas More College student government was additionally engaged in a difficult debate on the continued existence of the college. None of this was resolved during Ann's time as president, but she was an active part of the process, and it affected her deeply. As I prepared these remarks, I discovered among things saved but long forgotten 2 speeches that she gave. The first was her acceptance of the student body presidency at the end of her junior year. It was a brief statement full of gratitude to those who had served before, followed by a cautious statement about where Thomas More College would head in the coming year. The second, delivered on the eve of our graduation, was more sober, acknowledging indirectly that it had been a very difficult year, but still engaging a theme to which she would return again and again, that of making the world a better place, and at the same time containing a kernel of the faith and optimism which would later become one of her most treasured and powerful traits. It concludes with these words: as students, we are expected to examine and think. Perhaps we are even expected to protest and demonstrate for change. If these are symptoms of our search for knowledge, I hope and pray that no one of us will cease to demand change where we see injustice. I wish that Thomas More College will continue to dream. So what I wish for us and for our student government is to be strong enough to be patient, just enough to be impatient, and wise enough to know whether it's time for patience or impatience. Ann was never wrong about all the big decisions and events of our lives together. Before her death, she assured me that Emily and Elizabeth and I would be okay, that the community that we had been a part of for all of our lives together would embrace and support us. And so you have, and not just today. Thank you from all of us.
You to stand and join us in singing Raise Now to Westover. Stand if you are able. If you need the words, they're on the back of your program. We will be led by this year's heads of Glee Club, Mia McLean, Lindsay Cronin, and Meadow Wiki.
We
I will talk about Ann's early years at Westover. The 1970s was a time of tremendous cultural change. Colleges and secondary schools were struggling to find their footing, and all-girls schools were even fighting for their lives. Many did not survive. Ann came to interview for a position at Westover at this very difficult time. The position was for the fall of 1972. During my interview with her, being the person that she was, she made a point to tell me that she would be at Westover only for the time that it took for Ben to complete his doctorate at Yale, perhaps for 3 years. By the time Ben did receive his PhD, sometime in the mid-70s, Westover had had a further drop in enrollment to the point where our enrollment was only 60% of the enrollment of the school in 1970. We were running substantial deficits, our salaries were below average, and the future of the school was uncertain. Given these facts, and the fact that Ann and Ben were both so well qualified to receive multiple other professional opportunities, it is a wonder that they elected to stay in Middlebury. But though no words were ever spoken between Ann and myself, I had the feeling that Ann had come to the conclusion early on that Westover was not just a job, but a good place for her to work her teaching magic, and had set about with missionary zeal to improve the educational development of young folk, yes, boys as well as girls. In those early years, it would be incorrect to single Ann out individually, but she was a strong member of a team of new young faculty who came during the first 3 years of my headship. They included Annika Rothman, Bruce Coffin, Terry Halloran, and Alice Halloran. It is not a misstatement to say that Ann's early years as a member of that extraordinary team of young faculty might have been as important to the school as were her later years. I hope in giving those figures I'm not giving anybody's age away. I'll see how good your math is. To understand the full effect of Ann's teaching and all that she was able to accomplish, I need to continue to take you back to the early mid-1970s. For in the early 70s, nationwide, it was strongly thought that girls and young women were not as interested in or as good as boys at mathematics. There was a huge disparity between young men and young women in the number enrolled in math classes, which in turn limited career opportunities available for young women. With Ann's arrival at Westover, calculus was added to the curriculum. And I'm not sure about this. I think there was some tutoring that took place before that in terms of calculus, but there was no regular class. In Ann's first year, 3 students enrolled in her calculus class. Soon, however, word was out from the students taking her class that this was an okay class and an okay teacher. Each year thereafter, the enrollment grew steadily. In a few years, her students were taking advanced placement calculus. By 2010, about 76% of the graduating classes were taking calculus. While the whole country began slowly to recognize and accept the fact that young women could do math, Westover was clearly at the forefront, well ahead of the other schools in promoting and developing math courses. One problem still remained, however, and that was that the math programs being offered for young women were often considered not as rigorous or as demanding as those being offered by young men. two young men. It was felt by many that the young women would not survive a rigorous, competitive math college program. I understood this concern as I had taken 2 graduate-level math courses while at Columbia, working at Columbia. One was in algebra and the other one was in analysis. In the analysis course, I had an instructor who spoke somewhat broken English, and for the most part spoke seemingly to the blackboard, as he seldom turned his face toward the audience. He filled 25 feet of blackboard with numbers and signs each class, but explanations were sparse. A number of students dropped the course. I asked myself, how could students nurtured by Ann with such caring, such individual attention, and such small cooperative group work survive such a competitive, seemingly uncaring environment? I have to admit, I did not know the answer to that question. Was the traditional male-dominant methodology more of a sink-or-swim approach, right for all? Ann challenged this single-size-fits-all approach, arguing that there are many different learning styles for both women and men, and that different young people can get to the same end in different ways. So in 1987, in order to better understand and analyze the extraordinary results which Ann seemed to be getting, I set up a comparative study of the Westover's advanced placement calculus results with selected other secondary schools. I compared Westover's results with girls and boys of 5 top academic co-ed schools. Setting up groups of like aptitude students, Westover's results substantially surpassed the average of the schools being compared. Evidently, Ann's students not only knew their calculus, but had also of equal importance, developed the confidence to place their skills in competition with others. Now, with the science of range imaging, we can begin to understand more about the teaching process. We know now that teaching is much more than the conveyance of information. We know that the emotions are involved. Studies have shown, for example, that the effect on the brain of a young child being read to while sitting in the lap of a parent is quite different from the effects of a child being exposed to the same reading in a less humane way, and that this difference has a lasting effect. And instincts for a right, the caring or compassionate human touch, which so characterized all of Ann's teaching and activities, seems essential in creating the best learning environment, at least for the majority of students. Both young women and young men. Outcomes by teachers who invest themselves unstintedly in another's learning are doing much more than conveying information. They can stimulate interest and build self-confidence and touch the innermost parts of a young person. Meeting a challenge successfully leads to students taking on more and more challenges. It raises the student's sights and increases the student's sense of self-worth. These teaching outcomes, so prevalent in Ann's teaching, are not quantifiable, nor are they readily visible. They tend to be felt rather than seen. But when all the words have been spoken and all the numbers have been put aside, these outcomes will remain. They are both durable and profound. They will live on.
I wear this and the rose earrings in honor of Ann. Ann was a dear friend and is and will always be my heroine. 20 years ago, I vividly recall my stomach flipping with anxiety as I sat in Hillard House with my fellow trustees and the search consultant somberly pronounced, "I'm afraid you have a big problem." The year was 1996. I was the newly appointed head of the search committee, and the Board of Trustees had hired this preeminent consultant to conduct a proper search. Westover was on a roll. We were, in the eyes of everyone, moving up. The consultant elaborated, "I understand you have an internal candidate. That makes for a very challenging, if not impossible, search. We predict you will end up with this internal candidate who is not nearly as good as what we might find in the greater universe outside." We were stunned, and I was thinking, thanks, Anita Montgomery, for this, my first assignment. But we decided to have this consultant at least meet and talk with Ann Pollina and the faculty. He returned with his verdict. "You have more than an internal candidate. You have a phenomenally talented and visionary head for Westover right here, right now. No candidate out there has even a fraction of Ann's skills, talent, brain power, warmth, or sensitivity, and can fill those very big shoes belonging to Joe Mulder, while enjoying the incredible loyalty and enthusiasm of the entire faculty. Your search is over." 20 years ago, Ann and I were both of us were new girls, so to speak. To be very honest, we were pretty intimidated. Together, we faced a few upsets. Parents who did not like a discipline decision would call me at night, sometimes 9, 10 o'clock at night, to entreat me to intervene. Nope, wasn't gonna happen, and in fact, it didn't need to happen. Ann met with them and their daughter, really listened. The issue was diffused, resolved, with everyone feeling cared for. An Ann Pollina trademark. We also celebrated together. 17 years after a building had been built, the Adams and the Whitaker Science Center, we donned hard hats and had that shovel and were on that beautiful sunny day to break ground for the Fuller Athletic Center. The $6 million plus bequest was a huge surprise and a blessing from that member of the class of 30. Ann also warned all of us. She might have taught calculus, but don't take that course called remedial masculinity. None of us ever will forget her wonderful story of her initial horror when her daughter was playing with the masculine building blocks going, vacuuming. Ann's charge to the girls was straightforward. You are here not to hide from the world. You are here to learn how to build a better world. Can anyone not remember Ann's hugs? You felt so fully accepted, loved, comforted, celebrated, all in one embrace. This note from Ann is a perfect example. Who else but Ann would be thanking me on her last day at Westover? Well, it's real. My last day at my desk will be tomorrow. And I wanted one of my last official acts to be a thank you. Gratitude is Ann Pollina's middle name. 2 weeks ago, I had breakfast in New York City with a class of '99 alum who's now an attorney. A soft expression came over her face when I mentioned Ann's name. She said, "I never had a class with Mrs. Pollina, but I've never forgotten her." What an inspiration. And it reminds me of Maya Angelou's poem, "I will forget most of what you said. I will forget most of what you did, but I will never forget how you made me feel." That is Ann in a poem. Today, if we think about it, Albert Einstein long ago described a student as not a container to fill, but a torch to light up. In Ann's long career, she lit thousands of torches. At Westover, we call them lanterns. And I, along with each of you, parent, student, faculty, friend, family, we each hold a lantern with Ann's legacy. And in Ann's own words, we need to send out a phalanx of girls who are going to do what the world needs, which is to embody those qualities of care and nurture and community that our culture is desperate for right now. The world needs our girls. And to quote John Glenn, I'd like to not use the word legacy, but livacy. We are alive today. And today we are celebrating Ann's legacy and livacy. And we hold that lantern, and you know, sometimes it can feel a little bit heavy on our frail shoulders. And then, just in time, we see Ann's beaming smile, her loving manner, and her grace, which will be with us to give us strength to raise our lanterns higher.
Make way for Westover comes marching. From each heart give a rousing cheer. For the spirit that forever will unite us, let your voices ring out clear. And with our banner floating upward, above for all to see, we raise our motto ever, to think, to do, to be, and singing hail now to Westover. Raise your voices high. Westover forevermore, we raise our pride.
In her lifetime commitment to girls' education, Ann was engaged far beyond the Westover campus. Your program lists just some of the organizations where Ann played an important leadership role. And one of her most interesting and far-reaching projects was in connection with the Marinyundo School.
Good afternoon. I'm standing here today to remember and celebrate Ann. She was my mentor, my confidant, but most importantly, my very dear friend. She taught me how to live deeply, to care abundantly, to have courage, and to know that there was nothing more inspirational or inspiring than a daily life well lived. Ann firmly believed that Westover's greatness would be achieved through the lives of its students by educating and graduating young women to be caring global citizens imbued with the intelligence and fearlessness to change the world in small and large ways. When I first told Ann about the school we were building in Rwanda, the Mariunda School, she listened attentively and then said, "It's so important, Barry, for our faculty and our students to keep their eyes on the needs of the world. It is critical for our students right now, at this time, to recognize how they can make a difference. The project will be so important for our school. It will give the girls the opportunity to be trained in the kind of deep moral courage and ethics of care that turns compassion into action, into a life of purpose." Having said that, Ann immediately set out to set up interviews for me and the other members of our committee, and including Sister Ann and Brother Stratton, to come to Westover to tell our story, to see if others at Westover wanted to get involved. And because of Ann's ability to inspire, everyone, absolutely everyone, jumped on board, wanted to get involved, and support our school in any way they could. It was so interesting. The students started forming a committee right away and appointed a leader. And several faculty immediately volunteered to spearhead the faculty efforts. One of them even going online to check the calendars to see what the weather was going to be like in July and August in Rwanda, and to get her bags packed. Such was Ann's ability to inspire. Such was Ann's commitment to an ethics of care and compassion, and her deep belief that we all need to make a difference. The mark that Ann left on our school is indelible. Her voice was such an important voice. As Linda Beardsley, our education chair, noted, she contributed her ideas with a finely framed sense of the practical, as well as with grace and compassion for the relationships that underlie all excellent education. We were all inspired by her commitment to teaching and her belief that teachers could make a difference in the lives of all students. She not only helped to create a community that supported the teachers, and she was instrumental in helping to create a community that supported all teachers. Community for Ann was the school's greatest strength, its greatest asset. And for Ann, Westover and the Mariunda School was the perfect size community because they were small enough for each girl to speak with one voice, yet large enough for that voice to be a powerful one. In both schools, Ann was committed to the belief that hope had to be protected in the hearts of these young women who were coming of age in a world rife with seemingly unsolvable problems. Ann's hope for her girls and for herself inspired hope in all of us and motivated us to try to make a difference, to make the world a better place. Our best tribute to Ann would be to continue to foster this hope and this belief that we can truly be fearless and accomplish the impossible by just putting one foot in front of the other and doing the right thing. Ann did indeed create great people, and now it is up to us to continue her legacy and make each day a day well lived. Thank you, Ann. May God bless you forever and ever. We love you.
Ann was first and foremost a teacher. That was her life's commitment. She told the trustees when they asked her to take on the role of head of school that she must continue to teach, and she did. No matter how full her schedule was, she always taught advanced calculus every year, every semester. She had boundless energy and enthusiasm for all parts of her job, but teaching was sacrosanct. In the middle years of her headship, Ann accomplished so much both within the school and in the universe of women's education. She led the way for the renovation of the Performing Arts Center in the LBD building. She was a founder of the Online School for Girls, which was really a new thought in online education. She broadened our girls' financial education with the Invest in Women program. She ensured the success of Westover's biggest fundraising drive ever, $51 million, and she established the Raisin Center for Social Justice. But Ann was so much more than a gifted teacher and a leader in ensuring that girls were as competent and comfortable with math and science as they were with English and history. Quoting from one of her letters to parents 10 years ago, she said, "Westover does have a first-rate academic program, one that prepares our students well for success in college, but we will always be equally concerned with developing virtues of the mind and character, virtues like resilience, generosity, integrity, and we take these just as seriously as we do grammar and algebra." She continued, "I know that every parent understands how important it is to fight for the light in your daughter's soul." Ann cared about the light in all our souls. She was a role model, not just for the girls, but for many of us who had the privilege of working with her. Doug Lyons of the Connecticut Association of Independent Schools said about her, "For 43 years, Ann Pollina provided the young women of Westover with the daily example of a modern woman making moral choices, kind and caring choices, smart and forward-thinking choices. In 43 years, she touched the lives of more than 2,000 women who walked through these doors. But not just the women, she touched the lives of all of us, faculty, staff, alumni, friends. She cared about the light in all our souls. And as we look to her for an example and learned from her, we can carry forward her legacy. Her life has made a difference in the lives of every one of us.
honored to give the benediction today. And in preparing this benediction, I reference works from Abby Willerroot and an Irish prayer. She was always busy, always working. Her days were long, her spirit strong. Many things always got done by this one. If a need was found, there was always the sound of her bustling, efficient energy doing the job. Her heart was kind, her spirit strong. Each day of her life found her willing to dance the dance and walk the walk. She was a pleasure because she also took the time to talk. Her favorite things were the people she knew, her family, the students, the faculty, the staff, her friends, me and you. Often she shared a smile and a wink. She often made you puzzle and think. Her days were many, but not enough. Saying what she meant with never a bluff, acting in kindness to all she met. On this heart may the sun never set. Her wisdom lives on in those she knew. Thank you, dear Anne, we will never forget you. And like Anne, may you always have enough happiness to make you sweet, enough trials to keep you strong, enough success to make you eager, enough faith to give you courage, and enough determination to make each day a blessed and special day. Amen.
Please stand. This is Ben Oct, a blessing by John O'Donohue. On the day when the weight deadens on your shoulders and you stumble, may the clay dance to balance you. And when your eyes freeze behind the gray window and the ghost of loss gets into you, may a flock of colors, indigo, red, green, and azure blue, come to awaken in you a meadow of delight. When the canvas frays on the kurak of thought and a stain of ocean blackens beneath you, may there come across the waters a path of yellow moonlight. To bring you safely home. May the nourishment of the earth be yours. May the clarity of light be yours. May the fluency of the ocean be yours. May the protection of the ancestors be yours. And so may a slow wind work these words of love around you, an invisible cloak to mind your life.